Good afternoon. This is Barry Hersh. I am a clinical associate professor and head of the real estate development program at New York University School of Professional Studies, Schack Institute of Real Estate. And it is my great pleasure today to introduce noted urban designer, Professor Raquel Ramati. And Professor Ramati has put together, curated, and will take us through her selection of notable modern architecture. It is set up as if it were a bus tour, so it was a virtual tour, and through Manhattan of about 20 different buildings. And she will explain a little bit of the history and why they're notable. A few logistical items. You can ask a question in chat or in questions, and we'll answer them at the end. Professor Ramati will go through the presentation, and then we'll have time for questions. Again, probably the best thing is to put them in chat, and we'll talk about them at the end. So without any further ado, it is my great honor to introduce Professor Raquel Ramati and New York City Buildings, a virtual tour.
Thank you very much, Professor Hersh. It's such a pleasure to start my tour of modern buildings that were built in the last 20 years in Manhattan. I would like to begin by quoting Jerry Hines, the great developer, from the New York Times obituary written by Paul Goldberger on August 20th. And he said, architecture was his passion, although it was probably be more accurate to say that what he cared about most was fusing a point of intersection between serious design and profit-making real estate development. He took issues with his colleagues who saw creative architects as dangerous to the bottom line. Spending a little more to create a better building would pay at the end, he said. This is why in this tour that I'm presenting today, I want to emphasize the importance of good design to successful real estate projects. So as you will see in my presentation, I'm actually relating design and the added value that that design did to these various buildings that you're going to see. So let's get started. Okay, continue. Here I have a thing that says the meeting will be, okay. So I started my tour, actually I started my tour going from the west side all the way downtown and then back to the east side. And I decided to start basically with Lincoln Center redesign, which was a very expensive redesign. It was a $1.5 billion redesign by Dillard Scofiglio and Renfro architects, who also did the High Line, as we will see later on, who actually, their main objective was to link and relate Lincoln Center to the streets around. Next, you will see in the next slide how they actually changed 65th Street, creating retail along 65th Street, and added a major atrium between Broadway and 65th, which gets Lincoln Center much closer to the buildings around, as well as improving the whole entrance to the plaza. Next, please. Time Warner, I think, is a very important building in the city, designed by SOM, Skidmore, Owen, and Merrill, and developed by the related companies. The interesting thing about this building is that it's a mixed-use building It consists of office, the Mondrian Oriental Hotel, and residential. What is so interesting about the design of this building is that each one of the uses has a separate entrance, and it doesn't disturb to the other use. So you enter to the hotel from 61st Street, you enter to the residential from 58th Street. In addition to it, the city required that there will be an opening to the sky, like a visual corridor that from 59th Street, we will be able to see the sky, which was a mandatory requirement from the city, in addition to adding a jazz at Lincoln Center, a jazz center, which really connects it to Broadway and to Lincoln Center. Next. As you will see in the details of Time Warner, one, you see the connection visually of the interior of the center to the streets around and to Central Park. And you see an interior street which connects actually 8th Avenue all the way to 61st Street, thus creating another pedestrian way on the round building which embraces Columbus Circle. Next. A major interesting building on the west side is 15 Central Park West. Very big success from a real estate point of view, and not inexpensive. It cost $950 million to build, and it extends from Broadway all the way to Central Park. And the interesting thing is the architect, Robert A.M. Stern, decided to and put the low part of the building on the park and the higher tower on Broadway, and connected it, as you will see, with an incredible, interesting lobby connecting both. The architecture of Bob Stern is very much influenced from the architecture of the 1930s, the buildings along Central Park West, and you'll see it later on in some of his other buildings. Until another building that he designed, which we will see later, this probably was the most expensive apartments in the city. Next. And as you see the interior of the building, you see that lobby that I told you that connects those two towers, as you see here, and the opening to the amenity package, which is very extensive in the building. Next, please. Another major development, real estate development on the west side is Waterline Square. Waterline Square developed by Excel, and the master plan was done by Christian de Portzen Park, who is a Pulitzer Award winner French architect, designed as several buildings of different architects with a park in between. The interesting thing about this particular project is that it was a rezoning, which took about 7 years from manufacturing to residential. And I think it's very important for all of you who are going to be big real estate developers to know that you need a lot of money to rezone from manufacturing to residential, a parcel like that. But I think it worked out, and there are 1,000 units in this project, both rental and condominium. Let's go on, next. With a variety of wonderful architects, which include KPF, includes Vinoli and SOM. Next. Another building that is sort of a strange looking architectural building for the Manhattan skyline, but a very interesting building, which, by the way, most of my students love this building because it's so unusual, It's called the Via, and it was designed by a company called Big, which is a Danish company that's now very famous around the world. They're doing another project now in Hudson Yards. This project was developed for the Durst organization. And if you question and you ask, why is this triangle like that? What I'll tell you is a secret. This building, Helena, is also owned by Durst. And Durst didn't want to have a building which will obstruct the views of Helena. So Big built a building shaped like that. It has next movie theaters, the landmark movie theaters, and a very beautiful garden in between. And you can see here, this is the opening to the garden. Next, please. I think this building has its unique story in the city of New York because it is the only building that is landmarked where the Landmark Commission permitted a modern building to be built above the landmark. The story of this building, which was designed by the new part was designed by Sir Norman Foster, who is an English architect, and developed by Tishman Speyer for the Hersh company that has had offices all over around the city and wanted to integrate all their offices together, which they did. The story about it is that this portion, which was a landmark, was developed to become a tower in 1929, exactly when everything fell apart, and they never had a chance to continue and build the tower itself. Next.
Well, I have a little bit to add.
I haven't finished. Okay.
Uh, there are some other things about this building. This was the first new office tower built after 9/11. So it took quite a bit of nerve to go ahead with it. It was also one of the first green office buildings in New York City. It was LEED certified. And if you really want to know the stories about this building, Professor Brian Schwagel, who heads the undergraduate program at SHAC, was at that time, they had a real estate for Hearst and was directly involved with many of the decisions in this building. So if you want
Next,
to learn more
please.
about the inside
Next.
building. Okay.
Sorry. Okay, so you see here the landmark portion of the building, which is now a very interesting opening to the building above. And you see the kind of structure that the building is. And it is a very interesting building. It's hard to get in, but when you do your own tour, maybe you can try to get into it. Thank you. Okay, next. Jean Nouvel is a French architect. He designed a lot of buildings in Paris and all around the world, very well known. He designed another building in the city, which we're not going to see today. But he designed the building for the Heinz Corporation, which is a very expensive building, 82 stories high, $1.5 billion. It's right next to the Museum of Modern Art. And in fact, the Museum of Modern Art made a deal with the company to add the several galleries of the Museum of Modern Art in the building. The building itself actually bought air rights from the St. Thomas Church, which is located on Fifth Avenue. I personally have never understood why the city approved such a high building on a narrow street, but that is a personal thing, don't quote me. Next.
But I want to just add to that the recent court decision involving 200 Madison Avenue, which is a building that is, the structure is built to its full height. And a court looked at the assemblage of air rights for that building and declared that it was not legal, which could result in taking down 20 stories. It is under appeal. But after that, the City Board of Standard and Appeals and the Building Department actually reversed what had been their policy regarding transfer development rights, not allowing what are called split parcels, which resulted in this building and several others. So it really changed the code in New York City.
Next. Okay, so you see the building here. You see it has great views of Central Park. You see the building right here with the Museum of Modern Art below. Next. Bryant Park. Well, some of you go to school right next to Bryant Park. Bryant Park used to be a pretty dilapidated park, but it's a very beautiful park today for various reasons, which we won't go into today. But I'm going to show you two buildings along Bryant Park. One is the Bank of America Tower, which really makes a gesture, architectural gesture to the park by its shape. It was designed by Cook Fox architect, and it is the developer is the Durst company, the one that did Via. It's a very interesting building, both because it's very sustainable, and I won't go into the sustainability part of it because I know that at some other time maybe Professor Hersh will talk about it. But it got a lot of awards. It is a LEED Platinum building. It has a connection to the subways, and it has a covered pedestrian space for which they got air rights. Next. The other building on Bryant Park, which I think is a very interesting building, is 7 Bryant Park, which was developed by the Heinz company. Unfortunately, Jerry Heinz just passed away, as we discussed before, but he really believed in architecture. And you see the gesture that this building does to the park. It says, I'm opening my arms to the park. This is basically a glass and stainless steel structure, and it contains a very interesting plaza with the entrance to the subway in the below. And that located on 40th, just opposite the other side of Bryant Park. Next. Look at the detail of how it embraces the park. You see the park? It says hi to the park. So architecture really can be quite imaginative and symbolic, you know, just like churches, Catholic churches, basically the Gothic church says God is over there. Here we say the park is over here, and here is the plaza. Next. The New York Times building was a building that was actually a result of a competition where the New York Times had a competition of developers and architects, and it was won by Renzo Piano and FX Fowl architects, and the developer Forest City Radner, who has built a lot of buildings in Brooklyn when we do the next one. Anyway, this is a 52-story building, and it's located between 40 and 41st Street on 8th Avenue. It's very interesting because the outside walls are made of ceramic rods, and they wrap around a park in the interior, and inside, basically half of the building is the New York Times building with open floors, with stairs that usually are inside, located near the elevators. In this case, Renzo Piano decided that the stairs will be right outside of the New York Times, right near the elevation of the street, so people can really look at the street while they walk from one floor to another in the New York Times. Next, very elegant building. Now,
do you want to talk about the Times Center a little bit?
About what?
The addition where they have the events, what they call the Times Center.
Well, they have a theater in it, which they have different programs and so forth.
Yeah, which has been very successful.
Yeah. Okay. Because I'm going a little fast, Barry, because we don't have 20 buildings. We have about 80 buildings, so it's okay.
Okay.
One of the biggest real estate project in the country is basically Hudson Yards. It's a big master plan of 28 acres, which was also a competition that was won by Related at the last minute. And the master plan was done with Cohen, Patterson, Fox architects, which are called in short KPF. And it was built basically most of it on a railroad platform, which is very important to remember. It's a mixed-use building. It has residential, commercial, retail, art, and a community building. The vessel, which you may all know, is the artwork, which is right in the center of it next. What Related did, they just like as we will see downtown that Larry Silverstein did, instead of giving it to one architect, it selected various architects for the various projects. This project, 10 Hudson Yards, designed by Cohen Patterson Fox, basically is a 52-story building with which is a major building. It's 1.8 million square feet. I mean, these buildings are really large. They could be a whole town by itself in terms of floor area that they have. And it cantilevers over the High Line. We talk about it a little later on in the presentation, and has 7,000 employees. That's a large building. Next. The next building in Hudson Yards is 35 Hudson Yards, designed by David Childs of Skidmore, Owen and Merrill, who designed also Time Warner, which we saw before. Probably one of the largest architectural companies in the world, maybe after Gensler, the largest. Related companies and Oxford Properties are the developers, basically. This is a very high building, 92 floors, all limestone, basically, with 142 residential units and the first Equinox Hotel. Next. 15 Hudson Yards. 15 Hudson Yards was developed by Diller, Scofiello, and Renfrew, the architects, Renfrew, the architects who, before we saw that redid Lincoln Center, and Rockwell Group, very well-known companies, also for the Related and Oxford Properties. The project is an 88-story residential tower and a major cultural center, which we will look at in a minute. Let's continue on. Next, please. Connected to the building is basically the shed. The shed is the largest performance space that has been developed, which has in it theaters, galleries, several art functions, different large performance spaces, which can sit up to 1,250 or to 2,000 seats standing. Now, what's interesting about it is part of this building is on wheels and can move, can open in the summer a big plaza and be an interior space in the winter. And therefore it is called a building on wheels. Next. Another very handsome building in Hudson Yards is 55 Hudson Yards, also designed by KPF, basically for Related and Oxford. And the building is basically also large floors, 1.3 million square feet. The interesting building, which is also a Gold LEED certified building, it has these openings which have become extremely, extremely desirable. And it's all rented because of I think, because of the beautiful, simple design of the building. Next. 30 Hudson Yards is one of the unique buildings designed by KPF for Related in Oxford. It is the tallest building on Hudson Yards. It's a 101-story building. It has a major component of shops and restaurants. It has different, very elegant stores, such as Chanel, Dior, and Zara. It has Fairway grocery store, 750,000 square feet of retail. It's a major, major retail project. And it has a lookout, which just opened this week again, where you can see the whole city, all of the boroughs, including New Jersey. Very beautiful um, lookout, which was designed on top of the building. Next. All of this would probably not be such a success if there wasn't a decision to bring the subway right to Hudson Yards. And indeed, the line IRT subway number 7 has been extended from Grand Central to Hudson Yards. It has 2 entrances. It was designed by Richard Duttner, architect, for the MTA, and it was a very expensive station. It was $2.4 billion, but you go right into Hudson Yards. Next. You see here the interior of the subway, which is a very interesting with beautiful artwork, very attractive. And it has 2 exits to 34th Street and 33rd Street. Next. One of the interesting things that happened on the west side, of course, is the development of the High Line, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And what happened after the High Line was built, the city rezoned the areas next to the High Line, and several attractive buildings, which are very successful from a real estate point of view, and also which are very, very different kind of architectural expressions, have sprung out. One of the most beautiful boutique building is the Zaha Hadid building, architect who unfortunately passed away a few years ago for the related company. It's really a boutique building. It has only 39 units, but they've all been sold. They're very, very special, and it has extraordinary amenities. Next. You see the kind of architecture which Zaha Hadid is known for, which basically makes this building so different than many other buildings. And it's so interesting, you know, when I went to school in architectural school, buildings were built and nobody knew who the architects were in New York. It was very ordinary to have a building sold without any name of architect to it. Today, the architecture doesn't add only good design, but it also adds a brand which helps very much the development. Next. So what sprang these buildings is the High Line. Now, the High Line, which is basically an elevated park, which is 1.45 miles. Unfortunately, part of it used to extend all the way to 72nd Street, but part of it was demolished, was actually designed by the lead architect, James Cornerfield, and Diller Scofiglio and Renfrew architects, with Pierre Udolph, a landscape architect, who also did Millennium Park in Chicago and other wonderful landscapes. The interesting thing about the High Line is everybody takes credit for developing the High Line, but the truth of the matter, it was a community action by the Friends of the High Line that forced the city not demolish this very unattractive at the time railroad that passed through those buildings, a very dilapidated area. The Friends of the High Line are really a community group, and they basically are now running, they operate the High Line. They have board members and 80 employees to maintain it. And the interesting thing next about the High Line is before the corona, the High Line was the second most visited tourist attraction after Times Square in New York. So not only did it encourage a lot of fantastic buildings around it, but it also is a beautiful, beautiful amenity for the city. And many cities around the world are now trying to copy the idea of developing unutilized railroads into parks. Next. One of the buildings which is not far from the High Line, but is really on the waterfront, is the building that Frank Gehry, the well-known architect who did, of course, the Bilbao Museum, the Disney Center in Los Angeles, and many other buildings, developed for Georgetown Company, which is actually Barry Diller's company, the media mogul. Barry Diller really loves good architecture, and he hired Gehry to design this building, which is basically made of steel and glass panels, which are changing. You see those 5 sections, every piece of glass is different, and the design of which symbolizes the sail of a ship, or if you want, the waves of the Hudson River. Next. You see the building is also beautiful when it is lit at night. And you can see the interior. It's a splendid building, very small, but it is really a jewel of a building. Next. Another building that was built next to the High Line, basically at the entrance to the High Line, is the Whitney Museum. The Whitney Museum was designed by Renzo Piano, the same architect that together with Fox basically did the New York Times building. But the interesting thing about this architecture is that the building is asymmetric, and it really is basically influenced by the industrial character of the area. It added a lot of galleries to the Whitney Museum, and it's actually the place where you enter into the High Line and it connects to the High Line. Next. You see here the Whitney from other angles. Also, you can see how it is constructivism. You see how the pieces are put together very much in an industrial way, as opposed to the elegance of the New York Times building, for example, the sleekness of it. You see here the entrance, which is a beautiful lobby at the entrance. Next. Now we saw the big master plan of Hudson Yards. Here is another big master plan that was built in the last 20 years, unfortunately, for other reasons. The master plan of the World Trade Center, which was, of course, a result of what happened in 9/11 in the city, the destruction of the area of 16 acres, was a master plan. It was a competition which was won by Daniel Lipskind, architect, for the Port Authority and the Lower Development Corporation, who were the developers. The plan, in addition to the buildings that I will show you, includes, of course, the memorial, a museum, and transportation hub that we are going to look at in a few minutes. Next. There are several buildings that were built by Larry Silverstein, who, as you may have known, had the lease of the World Trade Center, the original World Trade Center, and developed the office buildings around. The first building that was developed was the 7 World Trade Center, which is basically on Greenwich Street. And it was designed by S. Skidmore Owen and Merrill David Childs. And it's a 52-story building, which is basically standing on a Con Ed substation, which was destroyed during the horrific what happened in 9/11. It is, I think, according to what I read, it is the first LEED certified building in the city of that size. Next. The interesting thing about the building, you see, this is the entrance, and the building is full of artwork. This was some artwork that was developed at the lobby level. But also what's interesting is that Larry Silverstein with the city decided to open up Greenwich Street and create a small park. So Greenwich Street actually continues now through all the way to downtown, which was enclosed in the old World Trade Center plan. Next. We will see some very beautiful, elegant buildings, architectural buildings. And once again, I want to tell the story that when Larry Silverstein had a very good relationship with SOM that did 7 World Trade, and he suggested to David Childs that they will design all the buildings. And David Childs said, this is not what creates a place. You have to, I'm very flattered. We will do 1 or 2 buildings. The rest of it, please give it to other major architectural firms. And so it was. And Larry Silverstein took some very good architects, put them all in 7 World Trade office, and they all worked together on the different buildings we were just going to look at. One of the architects was Maki, who is a Japanese architect, basically. Huge building, 2.3 million square feet, 74 floors. And the floors are very large, 34,000 square feet, with floors that the columns have 80 feet between columns. So it allows for a very flexible floor. Next. 4 World Trade Center, you see here, the building in light at night, and you see here the entrance lobby, which is really quite spectacular. Next. The next building, which is probably the predominant building, is Freedom Tower, or One World Trade Center. And in the master plan, it said that this building has to be 1776 high, for obvious reasons. The tower itself is 94-story building, and, and the Declaration of Independence was met by the height of the building. It basically has a base which looks like it's glass, but it actually is a huge base, 187-foot concrete base against any terrorist attack for security reasons. Next, on the top of the building, there's a very beautiful area that the public can come to watch to see all of New York. You see it here. Next. 3 World Trade Center was designed by Richard Rogers, a British architect who is also quite well known. At the time, he used to work with Renzo Piano, but now he's on his own. And this is basically a building which is also 2.8 million square feet. These are huge buildings with very big trading floors, which is what they needed, what the market needed at that area, basically. There's a 3-level lobby next, which is also quite spectacular in this building of Rogers, who just this week retired from the architectural office in London, a very well-known office. Next. One of the most extraordinary buildings in the city, in my opinion, is the Oculus, which is the transportation hub, which was designed by Calatrava. Santiago Calatrava is a well-known architect, Spanish architect, who basically is known for building bridges. He did several bridges around the world. And in this area, by the way, he also designed the Greek church, which is not completed yet, which was demolished in 9/11, and it's being rebuilt right now. Everybody was saying this was too expensive. It was $4 billion, and there's a lot of concern about the cost. However, I think that, like, we don't know what Grand Central cost was. I don't think we'll remember what this cost is because it's so spectacular. It basically connects 11 subway stations and the path. It connects to Vesey Street Terminal Station, the subway station. It's basically like a dove of peace in its symbol. And it also has a huge amount of very elegant retail, 365,000 square of retail, which connects, as we'll see later, to Brookfield Place at Battery Park City. The design itself includes the skyline here that you'll see, which is called the wedge of light next. The wedge of light basically is this. And the wedge of light was actually part of the master plan of Lipskind, who said that this location of the wedge of light is what the light that was at September 11 when the first building was destroyed. And that wedge of light was part of the mandatory requirement for this particular location. You see here the beauty of this particular building, all in white, and you see the retail, the amount of retail, which was actually developed by an Australian company and was sold now to another company. And you can walk from here all the way to Battery Park City. I recommend all of you to go and look at this beautiful building. Next. More classical architecture. More classical architecture by Robert A.M. Stern, who developed for Silverstein the Four Seasons downtown. The Four Seasons elegant five-star hotel is on an 82-floor building, which consists of nearly 200 rooms, hotels, and on top of it, condominiums. And guess what? Larry Silverstein lives right there, right there. I think next. I think it's a very interesting building because unlike some of the buildings we saw before that are very modern glass buildings, this building is basically a limestone building, and it is the same classical feeling of the buildings that we saw on 15 Central Park West early on. Next. Frank Gehry designs different things. As you saw, he designed the beautiful building for Barry Diller. He now designed for Forrest Ratner, developer, who is also the developer of the New York Times building. He designed a residential rental building, which is very unique in the skyline of the city, basically. It's 76-floor building with 1 million square feet. It has 904 units. They are rental units, but it also includes a high school. It includes a major plaza. It includes retail. And the architecture that he calls it is deconstructivism, a little bit, I don't know if it's a deconstructivism, but it obviously is a building that has a presence, a very different kind of architecture, which attracts the rentals, and the building is basically full. Next. You see here the detail of the building, and you can see it from practically everywhere in the city because it's a tall building and it has this singing thing, which only Gary can do. Next. Another kind of architecture, in this case for a condominium project, is a building that was developed by Hersh de Maron, a Swiss architectural firm, very well known, for Alexico Group. And their idea was that every unit should look like a basically house, an individual house in the sky. That is why this architecture that you see here, basically, it's located in Tribeca, and it's basically, it has a lot of amenities, including a 75 foot pool, which many of these condominiums have. Next. The floors are very high, which is very attractive in this particular building. And they have a very beautiful sculpture by Kapoor and on the street level. Now, does that relate to the existing buildings? I don't know, but it's certainly an architectural statement. Next. 227 Fifth Avenue, a very elegant building that was designed by Raquel Vignoli, a very well-known architect from Uruguay, who did also 432 Park Avenue, which we'll see later. The developer is Lend-Lease and Victor Developers. It's a 55-story building with 130 units. And what is so interesting is that the units in the corner don't have columns, which makes a very interesting interior to the building itself. There are 2 floors of amenities basically in the building. Next. And you'll see here, you see this is how the corner is located. And the apartments are extraordinarily beautiful. And the building is very, very elegant. Next. Another building that I think is worthwhile showing you basically is this one Madison Park, because it's so narrow that you wouldn't believe you can build a skyscraper on this narrow site located between 23rd and 22nd Street, fronting Madison Park. It was designed by Cetra Ruby and Ram Koolhaas, very well-known architect, basically for the related companies CIM Group and HFZ. CIM Group is a group from Los Angeles that also are a major developer in 432 Park Avenue. It's a 60-story building, basically. And the interesting thing is that the entrance is not located on 23rd Street. The residential entrance is located on 22nd Street, while the retail is located opposite Madison Square Park on 23rd Street. Next. You can see the elegance of this building and how narrow it is. It's only an imaginative architect and developer that can develop a building such as this. Next. The Public Hotel is a hotel of Ian Schrager, the well-known hotel developer who started with Studio 54 and went into a lot of boutique hotels, the Hudson Hotel and several others. And he decided to build a beautiful building downtown at 215 Christie Street called the Public Hotel, because the cost of the rooms are not as expensive as the 5-star hotel that we saw, for example, at the Four Seasons. It's a 28-story building with nearly 400 rooms, and it was designed by Herzog de Meuron Architects, who also did the building on Leonard Street, which we just saw. It also has a beautiful cafe and a Jean-Georges restaurant. And I think the interesting thing about Ian Schrager, next, is that he is really a detailed person. I mean, when he develops a building, the architectural design makes his buildings very, very unique. I mean, on the Hudson hotel that he has, he opened the entrance only on the 2nd floor. It's another interesting building. Here he made a beautiful entrance. As you see, the rooms are not big, but they have these huge windows, which makes it feel very large. And the rooms are really not that expensive. Next. A different kind of a hotel, the Baccarat Hotel, which was designed by Skidmore, Owen and Merrill and developed for Tribeca Associates. Basically is right opposite the Museum of Modern Art. And it's basically all sold. It has 114 rooms and a variety of amenities, including developing a new library on the location of where the old library used to be. Next. I think what's interesting about this elegant building is that they use the baccarat glass throughout the building. If you have a chance to have a drink at the Baccarat Hotel, it's a real treat. I recommend it highly. Next. This is a very controversial building. I like it a lot, but several people don't like it that much. What I like about it, it is so simple and so elegant. All these squares, everything is, it's like a piece of sculpture, in my opinion, designed by Raquel Vignoli, developers of the CIM group, which is this Los Angeles group, with Maklo Property, who actually assembled the land. Mr. Maklo assembled the land at the time. A very expensive building, $1.2.5 billion. It's 85 stories building, basically residential, but it has 96-story. I think it's the highest residential building until a new Excel building in the city. And it basically is very interesting because every 15 floors here, you can't see it so well. There are floors that are completely empty, so the wind can pass through those buildings. Vignoli said that he was influenced by this design basically by Joseph Hoffman, who was a designer from 1905. Which is sort of interesting. I mean, you can look at this building and look at the Bob Stern building, the classical building, and see the difference, basically. The interesting thing about this building, it's one apartment per floor, or sometimes two per floor, basically. You see here the building itself. You see those floors that I told you where the wind passes through, completely empty. And you see the entrance at Park Avenue and 56th Street. It has retail along 57th Street and a plaza on 56th Street. Next. Completely different architecture. We are in the same city, but architecture varies. And once again, Bob Stern, for the Zeckendorf Development Company, basically build a building at 45 East 60th, which is a 64th Street condominium with very few residential buildings. I think what's interesting in this building is that the residential buildings only start on the 12th floor. Somehow the developer took advantage of a thing called mechanical equipment, which is in the zoning ordinance, which doesn't limit how, or didn't, I mean, they're changing it now. It didn't limit how many floors you can call mechanical. You can do it, usually people try to do the minimum mechanical space in a building. But in this building, which is on 60th Street, Zeckendorf decided that he wants to start the apartments on the 12th floor. So he has 12 floors of sort of mechanical equipment, which is not really pretty empty. And all the apartments start on the 12th floor. He also bought air rights from the Christ Church along Park Avenue, basically. This building is extremely attractive. On the other side, which I don't think I have, next, they have beautiful terraces, and the entrance is an elegant classical entrance like only Bob Stern knows how to design. Next. Very different architecture. This is 157, which is a building developed by Excel, one of these high-rise buildings along 57th Street. It's 90 floors. It has the Hyatt Hotel on the first few floors and residential on top, which is a mixed-use idea that has been followed throughout. Even when we saw before the Four Seasons Hotel, they have apartments on top. People like to buy apartments where they can use the services that the hotel provides them. The hotel here has 210 rooms, and the amenities basically are shared between the two. It was designed by Christian de Portson Park, who before you saw did the master plan for the West Waterfront project. Next. Next.
Can't really do it.
Next, Barry. Oh,
Yeah, I'm getting
are we
it.
stuck? Are we
Yeah.
stuck? Okay. Look at the entrance of the building. You see that canopy, which is the canopy for the hotel, and there is, you see the residential and the canopy for the hotel, and you see the undulating architecture, which Orson Park did. Next. Once again, back to classics. Another building that is one of them, probably the most expensive building in the city today for a condominium building is 220 Central Park South, which was developed by a Vernado Realty Trust with design by Robert Stern. It's a very expensive building, $1.4 billion, 70-floor buildings that faces the park, huge units, 116 units, mostly sold, and also sold the most expensive apartment in the United States to I think a Wall Street person for $238 million. Expensive, and it's expensive, it's elegant also. Next, because it's the only site that actually faces directly on Central Park. So, I mean, there are very few sites left on Central Park South, and this is one of these sites which actually tore down a high-rise building by itself before. The entrance is quite extraordinary. You can't see here, but this is all green marble. And it's beautiful, and it fits very well into the beauty of Central Park South. Next. Adrian Smith and Gordon Gill are architects from Chicago who actually came out of SOM initially, basically. Today, they've done huge skyscrapers around in China and everywhere else. And this is one of their skyscrapers which they developed for Excel Development Company, and it actually goes all the way to 57th Street from 58. It has several 179 units, and it also has the Nordstrom department store of 225,000 square feet. It's so interesting that Nordstrom just opened before the corona. It has a lot of amenities, including a basketball court and open spaces. They just started marketing the building. Next. And the designer, Jim Carpenter, designed that frontage, which is very beautiful and lit at night, the Nordstrom frontage on 57th Street. Here you see the building, the cantilevered building. You see that it has open spaces and different floors and so forth. Next. Now I went back to Roosevelt Island because I thought there were some very interesting buildings there that maybe most of us are not familiar with. As you know, that on Roosevelt Island, the Cornell and the Technion have started with the Bloomberg's actually idea, started a high-tech special university. And there are several buildings that were built as part of it. One is the House of Cornell University, designed by Gary Handel, who did several beautiful residential buildings in the city. And this, you wouldn't believe it, this is the students' housing for the University Tech campus, which is really quite elegant and has views to the river from both sides. Next. And when I was a student, I didn't have such a room to live in, but the rooms are extremely beautiful, elegant. Next. Another building which was developed on Roosevelt Island as part of the Cornell Tech is the bridge at Cornell Tech, a very interesting firm Marion Weiss and Manfredi architect. I'm saying Marion Weiss because she's a woman. It's a couple, basically. And Marion Weiss worked for me once upon a time. Very talented company known around the world these days. And Forest City Development was the developer. Later, the building was acquired by Brookfield. It's a 7-story computer and science building, basically. Very expensive because of the finishes and so forth. And it's part of this campus, the 12-acre campus. It basically, let's go to the next slide. You will see it has this huge atrium. It has this huge atrium, and it has the incubators of offices for both students and for high-tech companies. You see the outside has a very beautiful plaza in front. Next. Next. The third building, which is part of the center, is the Bloomberg Center. Bloomberg gave some of the money. Cornell Tech and the idea, in fact, which was designed by Tom Main from Morphosis Architects, a company located in Los Angeles, and also did a building for Cooper Union downtown. It's a LEED certified building. It's a laboratory building of 150,000 square feet, and it's clad in bronze, basically, next, with beautiful glass. You see the building itself, a very interesting building designed by Tom Main. Next. So, oh, where is my map? Barry, you don't have my map. I have a map that
I don't have that. I don't know.
Okay, so for anybody who is interested, I don't know, I will send you, Barry, my map. For anybody who is interested in going on the tour themselves, I did a map. It was done a little bit later on, which is why Professor Hersh doesn't have it. But I will send it to you. And for anybody that is interested, you can try to get it through Barry Hersh so he can give it to you in some other way. I don't know how technically to do it.
No,
but if you loved this tour, we may be continuing. Maybe we'll go to other boroughs if we will be able to do it. Maybe we'll go to Brooklyn, who has a lot of interesting buildings. Now, I think this is a particularly interesting tour today because a lot of people say, oh, New York, what's going to happen? Is it going to remain? What is after the corona? I think what I showed you today is we are really strong. We're going on. People are investing in the city, and architecture matters. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Raquel. Thank you so much. What a fascinating tour. I thought it would be especially of value to those who don't know the city so well, or those who are taking classes online and not able to get here. I thought that would be great. This has been recorded, and it will be available through NYU Shack. So you can be able to click on it and replay it. I will add the map, or if you email me at barry.hersh@nyu.edu, I will send it to you. We have a few questions. We're a little over time, but there was a student who, actually an alum, who works making and marketing different kinds of facades. And one of the things looking at this exhibit, you have a lot of glass, some metal, and the Robert A. Stern, I'm not sure if he's the only one who uses more traditional limestone. Do you have any feeling about that we're being overcome by glass in particular, or glass and metal, or about the kinds of facades we should be promoting?
Well, I think it's an excellent question. And I think that's true not just in New York, it's true all over the world where skyscrapers are being built. What happens is actually glass changed, and glass today can, as you know better, Professor Hersh, glass can actually be pretty sustainable, and glass can have different ways of uh, creating warm buildings or cool buildings and so forth, which is one of the reasons, I think, one of the also reasons that one uses glass that much. I think it's a good question. I think that you'll see in the future more use of other materials. There is a whole trend now to use wood on skyscrapers in Europe, which may come to us as well, who knows. And you saw that, for instance, the building that Piano developed for the New York Times building is not really a glass building per se. It has another material in it. So I think it's an interesting question. I don't think glass is going to go away, but I think that using other materials is, I think, very desirable.
Okay, thank you. Mana asked a question about a specific building, and I will get back to her with that answer, but about the cost of 30 Hudson Yards. But there was
Which
another
one?
question. There was another question, broader question. This was from a student who was asking if he or she has a finance background, how does she get involved with architecture and design? And my first response is, well, you hire an architect. You pick the one you like.
First, you take my course. First, you take my course. I, I think
Yes,
that's a very good question, because as a developer, even if you want to use a good architect, you need to have some knowledge about architecture. I mean, if you look at Jerry Hines, or if you look at Steve Ross at Related, or if you look at Excel, I mean, these developers are interested in architecture. So I think that this is just the beginning to sort of open your eyes, but I don't think you just hire an architect. The question is, how do you hire an architect? Who is the right architect to hire? What do you want to actually what do you want to create a symbol? Do you want to what are you looking for? What kind of use are you going to develop? I'm serious. I think that,
that's a good point.
and I think Jack should put emphasis on the issue of combining architecture with finance and real estate. I think that's a very important question, and I highly encourage you all to take my course or other courses of people who are giving courses on architecture. Barry, would you like to add something to it?
Just a final comment. First of all, thank you so much. It was astounding. Uh, Secondly, again, it's recorded. You can ask me any questions, and I will forward them or get back to you if I can. I did want to note that the images are either from Professor Ramati or from the architects and developers that are shown on the slides. And again, thank you so much, Raquel, and all of you for joining us. And keep posted. We will do more about design at NYU Shack and about how spaces are going to be utilized going ahead in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.